All right, welcome back, everyone. From one high-powered presentation to another, I am so excited for this whole panel, and for each speaker. I have a very special relationship to all of them, and including this one, Kamilah Cummings, who I first met at the Purple Rain conference in Manchester, England. And she has been one of the champions of Prince's work, especially his meaning in the context of blackness. And so we're looking forward to hearing from her A Tale of Two Princes, Diamonds and Pearls, and the Myth of Colorblindness in the Work. Take it away, Kamilah.
What I did with this presentation is it's really an extension of research that I have been doing on Prince's relationship with his Black audience, which is very important to me. It's like post 2016, we're kind of seeing Hidden Figures Part 2, Prince's Black audience, and I don't want it to be hidden. I want that relationship to certainly be honored for what it is, what it was, and what it continues to be in terms of how it has sustained Prince. So that's one part of it, but it's twofold. The other thing that really sent me down this path was when the Sign of the Times anniversary DVD was released, and there was so much pushback when people were troubled by the lack of Black faces in that Sign of the Times Deluxe DVD release, and then also the problematic deluxe CD reissues of 1999, the super deluxe ones of 1999, and Sign of the Times, again, Blackness kind of fading to the background, being excluded in a lot of ways. And so whenever these conversations about Prince and race and excluding Black people or not really honoring their contributions come up, there's this common response from a lot of fans that, well, Prince was colorblind, he didn't see color, why are you talking about color? But I counter that with this presentation in saying that Prince was very much aware of color. He was aware of race. More importantly, he was aware of racism, and he had to navigate a racist music industry along with the racist society that he lived in, that we continue to live in, to be successful. And so that is the purpose of this presentation, to really look at Prince as a strategist and a tactician who exploited racism, and colorism because he understood it. So Diamonds and Pearls for me gives a really wonderful invitation to explore race and its influence in Prince's work. So that's why I'm happy to present as part of this panel. So let's get into it. So the number one quote that people tend to go back to when they diminish Prince's awareness of race and say that he was colorblind is oddly not the song Diamonds and Pearls, where he says, you know, there will be a light that shines so bright it makes you colorblind, when he's talking about this higher level of love, this deeper love, that he's talking about, the spiritual love in that song. People don't go to that. They actually go back to 1985 in his first televised interview on MTV. And I often hear people quote the part of the interview where he says, I, was brought up in a black and white world, and yes, black and white, night and day, rich and poor. I listened to all kinds of music when I was young. And when I was younger, I always said that one day I would play all kinds of music and not be judged for the color of my skin, but the quality of my work. And hopefully I will continue. So that's the part that people kept going to. I saw that quote over and over on message boards and YouTube videos and in discussions. And when I look at this quote, I don't see a man who says that he's colorblind, number one. So what we're looking at is a bit of a misinterpretation of the quote. But what I wanted to do was really kind of revisit this quote and scrutinize it more to get a better understanding of the context and what meaning I took from it. And I'll let you decide for yourself. So I have already stated that this interview was with MTV, and Prince at the last minute said he was going to do this interview in 1985, and they came up with a bunch of questions, and it was so fast that an MTV interviewer didn't even interview him. One of his managers actually read questions that MTV gave him. And one of the questions asked him about how he felt about criticism from people who said he was selling out and that he had somehow left his Black audience behind for the white rock audience. And the part that people don't pay attention to that I thought was very important, and where the quote comes from on this slide, is that he starts in a Morris Day kind of voice, his Prince as Morris Day voice, and he says, come on, man. When he first says that about leaving the Black audience, he says, oh, come on, cufflinks like this cost money. Then he says, okay, let's be frank. Can we be frank? If we can't be nothing else, we might as well be frank. Okay. And so when I read that, and then I read this, and I thought about Prince and the cufflinks, when I situate this quote in its entirety within a different context, I really think my interpretation that I come away with is that even in 1985, Prince understood the reality of economic inequity that was the direct result of structural racism in society, and specifically the music business, the industry within which he worked. He also knew the power and independence that economic wealth could bring, the freedom to be creative, the freedom to really live the life that he wanted to live. He understood that there was a need for Black artists to cross over to white audiences to earn that kind of money. So even though it seems like it's said in jest, when he says, hey, you see cufflinks like these, they cost a lot of money, it's to me a statement on the reality that, like for so many other Black artists, he had to cross over to white audiences to get a certain type of money, wealth that would give him the freedom that he needed, not only to explore himself, his full self artistically, but also to go on and do the work that he did later to liberate himself from the racist music industry. There's another part of this quote that is never mentioned that I like also, where he ends it and says, there are a lot of people out there that understand this because they support me and my habits, and I support them in theirs. I think that is a nod to the Black audience who understand the history of Black artists who have had to cross over to white mainstream audience to get a certain kind of wealth. I mean, Frankie Beverly and Mays could keep the lights on with a Black audience, but in terms of the type of change that Prince was trying to effect and the type of freedom that he sought, he knew he was going to need more money. I'm reminded of Nile Rodgers, who speaks about how for all his disco hits, he didn't really see real money until he started producing pop artists. But like Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, I feel that Prince interview is another example of people kind of cherry picking what they want and conflating it to kind of suit an agenda that is focused more on prejudice as an individual act than dismantling systems of racism. So when we talk about colorblind ideology, as Ashley Doan has told us, contrary to its name, colorblind racial ideology is not about the inability to see color or the lack of awareness of race. The point of colorblindness is how we see color or race. So even when people want to invoke this idea of colorblindness being, the disregard of race, that is not colorblind ideology, at least not the rhetoric of it. However, the rhetoric or theory and the practice have clearly diverged. And so, as George Lipsitz has pointed out, colorblindness pretends that racial recognition rather than racist rule is the problem to be solved. Colorblindness does not do away with color, but rather reinforces whiteness as the unmarked norm against which difference is measured. And so we see, even though in this post-civil rights era, people thought, oh, if we just stop focusing on color, that'll solve the problem of racism. We saw really it was the people who were the victims of racism calling for this. It's Prince and Diamonds and Pearls. It's In Vogue with Free Your Mind, Be Colorblind. Janet Jackson saying, oh, music by our side will break the color line. And Michael Jackson saying, it doesn't, if you think about being my baby, it doesn't matter if you're Black or white. It's still Black people, even with this ideology as problematic as it is, it's Black people. We don't have Madonna and Bruce Springsteen singing about people not seeing their color. So again, the weight is put on Black people. However, as we move forward to Kimberly Crenshaw and critical race theory, what we learn from critical race theory is that colorblindness and race neutral ideologies that support ignoring race also support what happens is, I'm going to try to speed myself up here, is that critical race theory challenges the idea that we have achieved racial equality, and it seeks to analyze the effects of racism. Many critics argue that colorblind ideology leads to a silencing of anti-racist viewpoints. So the backlash against Black people who call for centering Blackness in Prince's narrative, or even if we revisit yesterday's album with the Rainbow Children, a lot of that visceral response that people had to actually anti-racist viewpoints, this colorblind ideology has created this space where we're actually maintaining the system of racism and making it taboo to even mention racism. And instead, it's encouraging people to kind of ignore the role of race and look for everything else. And I paired this with the Billboard charts because that's how we're going to segue into Diamonds and Pearls. Because as researchers have demonstrated, race shades every part of society, as Edward Bonilla Silva has pointed out, especially in his book, Racism Without Racists. Nobody's a racist, but all these racist structures still exist. And so the music industry was a site of racism. And so Prince was navigating this space of racism within the music industry. And so I was showing here the difference. We have the Hot 100 singles, and then we have the Hot Black singles. So that, and this, I didn't do this on purpose, but if you notice, Bad Dance is #1 on the Hot Black singles chart at the time, which is going to take me to my next slide. So in the Beautiful Ones book, Prince told Dan Piperbring the music industry had siloed Black music from the start. They promoted Black artists for the Black base, and then if they captured that base, they would try to cross over. Billboard had developed totally unnecessary charts to measure and quantify this division, and it continued to this day, even if the Black charts now masqueraded under euphemisms like R&B and hip hop. And so I called this Separate but Unequal because this is the reality of it. You know, the push, the exposure, the marketing, the support that white artists got was not the same as what Black artists got. So it's still a back of the bus system where Black people are in the space of second class citizenry. So here, as we start to move forward and look at Prince now, so setting the scene of having two separate charts here, separate and unequal. So the measure of success then becomes the white charts. And this is important because as we were talking earlier today, many of excellent speakers kind of pointed out how Diamonds and Pearls was Prince's commercial return. A lot of the reviews at the time said that. And, you know, they talk about, oh, you know, he had a #1 hit with Cream, and, you know, he had this many songs that were like in the top 40. So again, it's this idea that the measure of success becomes the white charts, the Hot 100. And the charts, I just want to say really quickly, they had been segregated since the 1940s. However, what was interesting is that the only time that there wasn't a separate Black chart was when Motown was at its heyday and Black music was the music. And so during that little bit of time, I want to say it was like a year and a half to 2 years, there was actually no separate Black chart. So that speaks to another space of race and economics, but I won't, that's another presentation. So when we look at these interviews, because like, I forget who mentioned it earlier, I think it was Miss TLC, Prince or several people did, there was a lot of press around this. This was going to be a commercial hit. And so he did a lot of interviews. One that I found particularly problematic was with Chris Heath in Details. It's really reflective of the kind of condescending, lightweight hating interviews that a lot of white male critics did. But as Prince talked about the white critical establishment being unfair to him in the Beautiful Ones book, he was aware of that. You know, rock or music criticism has been the domain of white men. And there's, as Chris Daniels pointed out in his presentation last year, there's definitely a difference in the way white and Black press covered Prince. And so Here, they were saying how he was, in desperate need of a hit. Randy Phillips, mentioned that as far as recording new material, he was in an odd creative space. It was almost as if he lost his mojo for songwriting. J.D. Considine of the Baltimore Sun said, ever since Purple Rain, the album and movie that made Prince a star. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because he had 5 albums before that I was rocking to, but apparently he didn't become a star until Purple Rain. He said his fans have been waiting for the work that would take him and them to the next stage, but instead of a move forward, an album that would improve upon Purple Rain the way it refined breakthroughs of Dirty Mind in 1999, I thought it was interesting, the choice of words, that Purple Rain refined Dirty Mind in 1999. He says all we got was missteps. But I just want to point out that Black hits matter. So everyone keeps judging Prince's success by the white charts. But in this interview with Neil Carlin in 1990 in Rolling Stone, when the kind of idea of hits came up, Prince said, it's not about hits. I knew how to make hits by my second album. I thought it was very important that he said that in Rolling Stone, because his first #1 hit was not Let's Go Crazy, as people like to say. His first #1 hit was I Want to Be Your Lover. It was #1 on the Black charts. And this is Prince's recognition that Black audiences and Black hits matter. And so I put this here because if we look at the lead up to Diamonds and Pearls, where everyone said he lost his mojo, he needed a hit, it was, a bad, dire situation. In the 2 years leading up to Diamonds and Pearls, Prince had 6 songs in the top 10 on the Black charts. As much as they talk about Graffiti Bridge as a flop and they separate the album from the movie, Thieves in the Temple was #1 on the Black charts. We were rocking the Thieves in the Temple. And if you watch BET, the long version of the video, Put Your Foot on the Rock, Let Me Show You How to Clock, we were all up in it with Robin Powers. So that was a hit. Bat Dance was #1. Scandalous was #5. Jerk Out, By the Time, a Prince song, was #1. Tevin Campbell, Round and Round from Graffiti Bridge, #3. Yo Mister from Patti LaBelle, #6. So Prince knew that there was an audience holding him down. So when we go back to that quote about people understanding what he was doing, I really feel that was a nod to the Black audience understanding him having to secure the bag to do the things that he wanted to do. But let's talk about Prince the Strategist, because this is how we get to Diamonds and Pearls. I like to call Diamonds and Pearls Prince's Put Some Respect on My Name album. It's, I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. Let me show you that I know how to do this. So I love this quote from Greg Tate that says, Prince was a pop music tactician and strategist who had to play shade games to appear on MTV and cross over to a mainstream audience during the 1980s. Again, this is a very highly segregated time. We know Prince didn't even make it to MTV until 1982 with 1999 and Little Red Corvette. So he knows how to play the game by this point. So here's one of the strategies that Prince employed. It's an appeal to whiteness. And so this quote from actually Ruth Frankenberg that Robin DiAngelo uses in White Fragility. She says, I use the terms white and whiteness to define a social process. Whiteness is a location of structural advantage, of race privilege. Second, it is a standpoint, a place from which white people look at ourselves, at others, and at society. Third, whiteness refers to a set of cultural practices that are usually unmarked and unnamed. And so when we don't call these things what they are, name and claim them, we get the types of reactions that we had with the Rainbow Children. But when we look deeper into this, there are certain factors that kind of inculcate this whiteness ideology. One of them that DiAngelo points out is centering whiteness in everything, including Black narratives, valuing whiteness as superior, and regarding whiteness as a universal standard, one by which all others are measured. And so I pointed this out and put up the different Prince bands here, because we all know he had his greatest success with The Revolution, which was a majority white band. I'm not talking about talent or anything like that. That's all subjective, which band you like. But we know that The Revolution was his most commercially successful band. And it's not missed on me within this framework that they were a majority white band. The Love Sexy Band was amazing. They couldn't even show up with any real respect in the Sign of the Times Deluxe release, a majority black band. And then we've got the next band that's majority black. But Prince has learned something from the Sign of the Times band. And he's employing a strategy he's already used before, a tactic, if you will, that I'll talk about in a moment. So let's start looking at the tactics of appealing to whiteness. The first one was to write a Billboard Hot 100 hit. And I'm going to move through these a little quickly to try to get us back on time. But I wanted to take this quote from Joseph Vogel's The Price of the Beat, Black Popular Music and the Crossover Dream, where he said, critics dismiss Black associated music genres as formulaic, inauthentic, and shallow. White rock, by contrast, is viewed as authentic, serious, and important. Such evaluations led directly to programming decisions on radio and eventually to cable television channels such as MTV. And our tendency to think of race relations in America as a linear story of progress, we often forget that music became increasingly segregated over the 1970s. In the late 70s and early 1980s then, Black music found itself in a familiar position. Commercially popular and culturally influential, yet simultaneously marginalized and critically devalued. This takes us back to Prince's Black hits being disregarded and the desperate need for a hit. So he says, okay, I'm gonna show you how this is done. I'll write a Hot 100 white radio and video hit and silence my critics. And he did that with both Diamonds and Pearls and Cream, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I just took these stills from the video Diamonds and Pearls to show, again, thinking about race and color. Prince is hitting all of the points here. He used the visual medium, the visual aesthetic of music videos that came to prominence during his time. Whoops, sorry about that, guys. That came to prominence, I'm gonna be a little longer, who came to prominence during this kind of video time. And he uses visual images very strategically, which is why I loved Malay's presentation earlier about him in film. So with Diamonds and Pearls, he's got a diverse group of kids. Everybody loves a mixed group of kids. He's got a light-skinned Black woman. So it's, you know, Black, but not too Black. Arthur Ashe talked about this, how the white majority likes Blacks in only token amounts, and it's toxic behind that. So Prince is very strategic with this. The band is spread out, so you don't, in both the Cream video and Diamonds and Pearls, the band is spread out. So he's got a majority Black band that all of the critics kind of talked about, but there's not this visual concentration of Blackness. Everybody's kind of spread out in these videos. You've got the dancers here. You've at the top there, you've got Rosie and Prince and Diamond and Pearl in the beautiful City Hall of Los Angeles. So it's everything that's going to appeal to everyone. And it was a success. #1 on the Hot Black Singles. No one ever talks about Diamonds and Pearls as a #1, but it was on the Black charts and #3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Next tactic, centering white women. So Prince often played to hegemonic ideals of white feminine beauty. And if we look at what Jill Jones said here, putting blonde hair on me made the ratio on stage to appeal to the MTV generation. And when I first read that, I was like, ratio? And I thought, right, you know, with her in the band for Little Red Corvette in 1999, the balance, there's a balance there. It looks like she's white. They're passing her off. He's passing her off as white with the blonde hair. Then the Revolution comes, and that's even more white than Black. And so he played around with this a lot. He balanced this mostly Black band with Diamond and Pearl. You know, they're not members of the band. They're not on any of the band shots, but they're in a lot of the promotion with Prince. And they kind of play to, I put this picture of Cindy Crawford there because she was the model of the day, the top American supermodel. They kind of draw off of that look. But if we look at much of Prince's like #1 or most popular crossover songs and videos, the white feminine beauty ideal or white femininity is very much front and center in there. Wendy pantomiming to his guitar and Kiss, Wendy and Lisa in Raspberry Beret, Sheena Easton, and you got the look, the Vicki Vale thing going on with the 4 Blondes, and then Diamond and Pearl and Cream. So let's look at Cream. Cream went to #1. Cream, here we've got the white feminine beauty ideal on display all throughout the video. Again, the band is placed in the back. They're separated out in the back. Rosie is prominent with her singing, but still she's up higher and away. The focus from the start in the train station all the way through is Prince in the space of white feminine beauty. And it's interesting because we talked about Little Richard. It's a much different approach than Little Richard, who tried to make himself less threatening sexually to white women. But Prince, because of the myth of his being biracial, his own physical aesthetic, he has a different adjacency to white women than Little Richard did. Okay, I'm going to go through these and I'll be done. So the next strategy is keeping the black card current. So Prince was never going to get his pass revoked. He was not going to wake up one day and be Johnny Mathis. It was clear that throughout his career, he was always nurturing his relationship with his black audience because it's the audience that sustained him. And so in that same MTV interview, when they're talking about David Rifkin saying that the next album was going to be really funky, Around the World in a Day was out and Parade was coming, Prince said, I don't really think I left my funk roots anywhere along the line. I thought that was important because, again, he's situating himself as a black artist. He's situating himself in the funk, and he's saying, I never left the funk. And so here he comes back with this black band. He's got the rap, the hip hop we've talked about. So he's very much the imagery we've talked about with the Get Off Maxi single videos. He invited Black Beat to Paisley Park along with the other people. So there is definitely this relationship there. One of the tactics of keeping his black card current was the slow jams. Greg Howard talked about Insatiable earlier. In the Spin magazine interview in 1991, Prince said, if I was somebody else, writers and critics would be all up in the way the chords work and the keyboard lines. They just write off my slow jams. He's talking about the mainstream audience because, you know, black folks love a Prince slow jam. We don't even wait for official singles. I mean, here in Chicago, we were playing Adore on the radio when 2 Are in Love was on the radio. Sometimes you might have heard the B-side of I Love You and Me. Black folks love a Prince slow jam. So what did he give us? Insatiable. Insatiable was released exclusively to Black radio and video. So there's a lot of exclusive content that he's given to Black radio and video. The video visually is stark contrast to Cream. So we see here Barbara Lee, the Puerto Rican stunt woman actress and brief girlfriend of Prince, as the love interest. And we see all these different melanated shades of women throughout the Insatiable video, and Diamond and Pearl are not present here. So the last tactic is nurturing Black media relationships. And again, Prince never bit the hand that fed him. And I love what Cynthia Horner said at last year's symposium, where she said there was this mindset from the label that he wouldn't need a write-on anymore. Prince would not let someone disparage what he had already received. He appreciated the fact that had it not been for a magazine like a write-on, he would never have gotten as far as he needed to in a timely fashion. So again, in this big press blitz, he invites Black Beat. And one thing that was interesting in that interview was when one of the people from the label went to introduce Stephen Ivory, the writer at Black Beat. Prince said, oh, I know this guy, I read his stuff. And the person was surprised. They were like, oh, you know him? And he's like, yeah, I do. BET, exclusive content on BET, you know, always acknowledging BET in different ways. And the biggest way that he nurtured Black media for me during this promotion was appearing on the Arsenio Hall show, because it was just Black. I mean, he had Patti LaBelle there as the guest host. I have to point out, Miss Sheila E., always giving her props. She was in the audience there watching him. Sitting behind Sheila was Little Richard, which always gives me goosebumps thinking about him there watching Prince. MC Hammer's in the audience. So we've got the hip hop thing. So it's the past of Black music, it's the present, it's the future. And that he did this groundbreaking full concert on this show that was aimed at the urban, i.e. Black audience at this time, I thought was really, really amazing. And one thing I want to point out is just like they weren't in the Insatiable video, Diamond and Pearl were not on the Arsenio Hall show either. So they're on the cover of the album, but he uses them very strategically. I don't want to call them props, but he used them strategically. So to bring this to an end, I have to end with this amazing quote from Twyla Perry that I absolutely love and will use forever. Prince made conscious and strategic representations of race, decisions about how he represented race in his art, in his work. So as Twyla says, rather than being transcended, race was a factor of central importance throughout Prince's life and career. And I think just to kind of go back to the Rainbow Children, as Prince moved from colorblind ideology to critical race theory, if you didn't follow the arc of his ideological evolution, then the Rainbow Children was jarring for you. But if you followed that arc, if you got the war and these other things, you saw him starting to really realize what it was going to take to really challenge racism. And we get that on the Rainbow Children. So again, with this presentation, I just wanted to point out that Prince was not colorblind. He was very much keenly aware of race, color, and racism, and he made conscious and strategic decisions to navigate them to create the career he wanted. Thank you very much.